There are fates far crueler than death, and I have endured them all. My name is Ulrich Wehner. Once, I held the rank of brother captain in the Iron Hammers chapter, and I believed, with every fiber of my being, in the glory of service. I thought the highest honor a space marine could ever know was to die in battle. I was wrong. To live in battle forever is no blessing. It is a curse, one no prayer can banish, one no faith can make bearable. They tell me that I have been asleep for 73 years. But when I speak of sleep, I do not mean what mortals know. It is not the kind of rest where dreams carry you to distant shores or warm you with gentle memories. No, my sleep is the sleep of the dead who cannot die. It is a void so absolute, so suffocating, that when consciousness returns, I wonder if I had ever existed at all. When I awaken, I search for my body and find only steel. I reach for my hands and find weapons instead. I try to breathe, and all I hear is the rasping rhythm of mechanical lungs, life support systems sustaining my ruined flesh inside the tomb they call salvation. The first time I awoke within this sarcophagus, I prayed it was a fever dream. The battle on Morak Prime had gone badly. I remembered the Orcish horde breaking through our defensive lines, their crude axes and hammers falling like rain upon ceramite armor. I remembered the crushing weight of my power fist as it shattered the skull of their warlord. And I remembered the sharp agony when his dying strike pierced the gap between my backpack and gorget. My spine snapped like a dry branch. Death should have followed swiftly. Death would have been mercy. But instead, I opened my eyes to optical sensors. Through them, I saw the skull-helmed visage of Chaplain Morai, leaning close to my sarcophagus. His voice, heavy with ceremony, filled my ears. "Brother Captain Wehner," he intoned, "you have been chosen for the highest honor. Your service to the Emperor continues." I tried to speak, and what emerged was the grinding mechanical voice that has since become my own. "What have you done to me?" "We have saved you," Morai replied. Yet there was something in his tone, something that betrayed the cruelty behind those words. "Your body was broken beyond the reach of our apothecaries, but your spirit burns too brightly to be lost. You are reborn, encased in iron and adamantium. You are a Dreadnought." The word struck me like the fall of an executioner's blade. I had seen Dreadnoughts before, towering engines of war striding, like living fortresses across battlefields. I revered them as holy relics, embodiments of the chapter's undying heroes. But now I understood. I understood why they moved with such grim purpose, why their voices echoed with unearthly weight. They were not machines of glory. They were prisons for the living dead. "How long?" I asked, though I already feared the answer. "The surgery was completed 3 days ago," Morai said. "Your systems are stable, within acceptable parameters." 3 days. I had been unconscious for 3 days, yet it felt like centuries. Already, I could feel the abyss yawning beneath me, the endless void that would consume decades of my existence. "When will I sleep again?" I asked. Morai's silence lingered far too long. "When the chapter has no more need of your service," he finally said. He did not say never, but I heard the truth in the hollow space between his words. The first battle came within a week. Orc raiders had descended upon an agri world in the Hadrian system. The Iron Hammers were dispatched to cleanse them, and I, entombed in adamantium, strode forward into war. I was sealed within the drop pod alongside my battle brothers, yet everything about the ritual felt strange, warped by the reality of my new form. Once, I had checked my bolt pistol, running my fingers along the familiar weight of its grip. Once, I had felt the reassuring heft of my chain's word and whispered prayers for victory and for honor. Now, I tested the targeting systems of an assault cannon fused to my frame and flexed the immense articulation of a power fist that was no longer truly mine. Where once I had breathed vows of faith, now I simply existed, a fragment of human consciousness caged within metal and ceramite. The drop was violent, as every drop was, but gone was the surge of adrenaline that had once made my twin hearts thunder with anticipation. The crash of impact, the hiss of opening seals, the first breath of alien air, All of it reached me only as numbers and readings translated into data rather than sensation. I missed the reassuring weight of a bolter held in my own hands. I missed the feeling of boots striking hard ground, the bite of soil and stone beneath my soles. Yet when battle was joined, I began to grasp why I had been preserved in this prison of steel. My assault cannon roared with the Emperor's wrath, its shells shredding orcish flesh as if it were parchment. The power fist crushed skulls, tore through crude armor, and split the beast in half with ease my mortal body could never have known. In those hours of slaughter, I was death incarnate. I was the angel of annihilation the chapter had forged from broken flesh and unwilling spirit. The greenskins fell like wheat before a scythe, their crude blades sparking uselessly against my armor. Their guttural roars drowned beneath the thunder of my guns. I advanced with a pace that could not be halted, reducing all resistance to ruin. For those brief moments, I was everything a space marine was meant to embody. I was vengeance made manifest. But battles end. Victory came, the Xenos' threat burned away, and the world was reclaimed for the Imperium. My battle brothers returned to the strike cruiser, their voices lifted in hymns of triumph. I was not among them. I was loaded into a separate chamber, shackled in place, my vast systems slowly cycling down into the hollow mimicry of slumber. "Sleep well, Ancient One," said Brother Thaddeus, a young warrior who had fought bravely at my side. His words carried kindness, but he could not comprehend. Sleep is no rest for me. Sleep is only a form of death. As my awareness dimmed, I wondered how long this time would last, how many centuries would pass before the void released me again. The second awakening came sooner than I expected. Months had passed, though they stretched like years in memory. The chapter was under siege. A warband of chaos had torn from a warp near our home world of Karath, carrying with them the stench of corruption and the promise of damnation. Every blade was needed. That included me. This battle was nothing like the last. Where orcs were savage but predictable, the Chaos Marines were cunning, their strategies reflections of our own. They anticipated our movements because they had once made them. They exploited our weaknesses because they had once shared them. And before me rose a nightmare, a Chaos Dreadnought, clad in rusted iron and adorned with screaming, demonic visages. Its pilot had once been as I was, a space marine, until corruption had twisted him into a horror. Our weapons clashed. Our armor screamed sparks into the night. From his corroded vox grill, a voice crackled like venom. "Do you see what you are, loyalist?" he hissed. "A ghost in a shell, a soul in chains. You think you serve the Emperor, but you serve only the machine that devours you." I crushed his head with my power fist, silencing his blasphemous words. Yet even as his broken form ceased its thrashing, the echoes of his mockery lingered in my mind. Was this what I was becoming? Something more machine than man, bound together by duty, desperation, and steel? I forced the thought aside and pressed on with the slaughter, but the seed of doubt had already been sown, and the soil within me was all too fertile for such poisonous growth. The forces of chaos were eventually driven back into the warp from whence they had come. Yet victory was hollow. Their assault had carved grievous wounds upon our chapter. Too many of my brothers lay lifeless upon the field, their gene seed carefully harvested by our apothecaries so that the future might one day reclaim their sacrifice. I stood vigil at their funeral rites, towering above the pyres as silent guardian, while fire reduced flesh and bone to ash in memory. Chapter Master Corvin himself gave the eulogy, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "These brothers have found peace in the Emperor's embrace," he said solemnly. "Their watch is ended, their duty complete. They rest now in halls of honor, where pain holds no dominion, and sorrow cannot reach them." I envied them. I envied their peace, their conclusion, their rest. They had died as heroes, their names etched into the annals of glory, their deeds to be sung across the Imperium. I, meanwhile, endured, trapped within this sarcophagus of metal and ceramite, condemned to witness the slow decay of all I once cherished. When the rites ended, I was returned to the depths of the fortress monastery, into the sanctum where the dreadnoughts slumbered between wars. The chamber was vast and echoing, lined with rows of sarcophagi in varying states of function. Some hummed softly, the faint pulse of life support preserving the half-dead within. Others sat cold and silent, their ancient warriors finally granted the release that had been denied them for so long. Brother Ancient Gareth occupied the sarcophagus beside mine. He had been entombed for over 4 centuries, and his wisdom was often sought by the chapter's highest officers when grim decisions weighed heavily upon them. As my systems began their slow descent into dormancy, I heard his voice crackle across the Vox link that bound all the ancients together. "First battles are always the hardest, young brother," Gareth said, his mechanical tones carrying faint traces of what might once have been warmth. "You still remember what it was to be flesh and blood. That memory is both blessing and curse. How do you bear it?" I asked him. "The isolation, the endless waiting, the hollow sleep." "By forgetting," he replied. "Each time you wake, you will remember a little less of what you once were. The human memories fade like morning mist, leaving only the warrior's purpose. That is the kindness the machine spirit grants to those who serve faithfully." His words should have been a balm, but instead they filled me with dread. To forget what I had been was to lose the last fragments of Ulrich Wehner. Would I, in time, become nothing more than a weapon with a soul, a gun that could think but no longer dream? The thought chilled me more than any enemy blade ever could. Sleep claimed me again, and this time it stretched longer. When next I awoke, frost rimed my sarcophagus, and the recycled air tasted stale upon my olfactory senses. The chamber was darker than I remembered, many of the other dreadnoughts now cold, their voices silent forever. I reached across the Vox network for Gareth, but his frequency returned only static. "Brother Ancient Gareth is at rest," came a voice I did not recognize. Another dreadnought stirred nearby, his sarcophagus adorned with fresh honors I did not recall. His vigil ended 37 years ago. "I am Brother Ancient Matthias. Welcome back to the living, Brother Ulrich." 37 years. I had slept for 37 years, and in that span, Gareth had at last been granted the peace of true death. A part of me rejoiced for him, but a far greater part felt only the cold fingers of fear tightening around what little remained of my heart. How many more of my brothers had fallen while I slumbered? How much of the galaxy I once knew had shifted beyond recognition? What have I missed? I asked. "Much and little," Matthias replied. "Wars have been fought and won. The chapter has recruited new brothers to replace the fallen. The Imperium endures, as it always has and always shall. But the details, the faces, the names, these fade with time. Only the eternal verities remain." I was awakened for yet another battle. I no longer remember the enemy we faced or the world where we fought. The campaigns blurred together in my memory like watercolors bleeding in the rain. Orcs, Chaos Marines, Eldar Raiders, renegade Imperial forces, it no longer mattered. I had become what the Emperor required, a weapon in his endless arsenal, pointed toward whatever foe demanded annihilation. But with each awakening, I noticed changes. The faces of my battle brothers grew younger, less familiar, their eyes filled with reverence for me, though they did not know me. The rituals of preparation evolved in subtle ways, small deviations that whispered of decades slipping past like days. Even the architecture of our ships and fortresses shifted, showing the steady work of tech marines who had never known me as anything but an ancient, an artifact to be honored, not a man who once lived and bled beside them. Most disturbing of all were the changes within myself. It became harder to summon memories from my years as a flesh and blood space marine. The faces of my old squad blurred into indistinct shadows. The sound of my original voice dwindled into a faint echo, drowned out by the mechanical growl that now carried my words. Even my name, Ulrich Wehner, began to feel alien, as though it belonged to someone else entirely. During one awakening, I sought the chapter archives to study my own history. The records were preserved, lovingly maintained by the librarians. But reading about Brother Captain Ulrich Wehner felt like examining the life of a stranger. Here was a man who had led charges across a dozen worlds. Here was a warrior who had earned the respect of his brothers and the dread of his enemies. Here was a hero deemed worthy of preservation in living iron. Yet I could not bridge the gap between that man and the being I had become. The memories existed, locked away in the fragile remnants of my organic mind, but they no longer felt mine. It was as if Ulrich Wehner had truly died on Morak Prime, and something else had risen in his place, wearing his name like an ill-fitting mask. It was during the siege of Elethra that I first confronted the full horror of what I had become. Elethra was a shrine world, its surface covered in cathedrals and monuments rising toward the heavens like stone prayers. The enemy was a chaos cult, a cancer that had burrowed into the heart of the planetary government, twisting faith into blasphemy until prayers became curses and devotion became damnation. I had been awakened for this campaign because my tactical database contained extensive records of urban warfare and siegecraft. The tech priests who oversaw my activation seemed particularly eager, as though deploying me against heretics instead of Xenos sanctified their labor. To them, this was purity of purpose made manifest. But as I was sealed into the drop pod, surrounded by a squad of tactical Marines, I found myself studying their faces through my optical sensors. They looked at me with awe, perhaps with fear, but I searched their expressions for something else, for a reflection of the man I had once been. And I found none. They were young, even by Astartes standards, their armor gleaming with the flawless luster of recent forging. Among them was a sergeant whose nameplate bore the word Corin. There was something in his face, an echo of someone I had once known. Yet the memory eluded me, slipping through my grasp like smoke. "This is an honor, ancient one," Sergeant Corin said as the drop pod's clamps sealed and the engines prepared for launch. "My grandfather spoke of fighting beside you during the Morton campaign." The Morton campaign. I searched my memory banks, trawling through endless tactical reports and casualty ledgers. The data was there. The orcish hordes, the long siege of a Hive City, the hard-fought attrition of months under fire. Yet the human details, the voices, the faces, the fear and triumph were gone. Time and the erosion of what remained of my mortal brain had stripped them away. "Your grandfather was a fine warrior," I said at last, but I could not recall his features, nor his voice, nor even how he met his end. "He died with honor," Corin replied firmly, "and he lived with honor as well. He often said that to watch you fight was to witness the Emperor's wrath itself." More words, more empty praise. I had heard such sentiments countless times over the centuries, and they no longer stirred anything within me. I was what I was, a weapon wrapped in the hollow legend of a man who had died long ago. These young Marines saw glory where I felt only the mechanical compulsion to execute my programming. The descent to Velethra's surface was brutal. Atmospheric storms clawed at our pod, making its frame shudder as we plunged through a sky choked with black clouds. When we struck the ground, the impact hurled one of the tactical Marines against his restraints so hard that his helmet split with a sharp crack. I felt nothing. My vast form was too heavily armored, too securely braced to notice turbulence. The city we entered was a monument to corruption. Once, its spires had pierced the heavens as beacons of faith. Now, twisted runes and the profane sigils of the dark gods scarred their facades. The air itself seemed heavy with malice, thick with the echo of prayers offered to things that should never have been worshipped. Even my sensors, mechanical and precise, registered the wrongness saturating every stone. Yet I felt no fury. Once, the sight of defiled altars and mutilated statues would have filled me with righteous rage, driving me to strike with holy vengeance. Now, I simply recorded tactical implications. The thickness of walls reinforced by heretical symbols, the strategic use of collapsed sanctuaries turned into strongpoints. Desecration was reduced to battlefield calculation. We met our first resistance at the Cathedral of St. Margar. The cultists had barricaded themselves behind overturned pews and makeshift defenses. Their lost fire sparked against our armor like a field of dying stars. I brought my assault cannon to bear, its thunderous shells tearing their cover to splinters and their bodies to ruin. Advance, I commanded, and the tactical Marines surged forward with flawless discipline. Room by room, they cleared the cathedral, their bolters barking judgment upon every heretic who dared defy the Emperor's will. But even as I watched them work, I found myself measuring acceptable casualty rates, reducing their valor to percentages and projections. Sergeant Corin took a round to the shoulder. The shot slipped through the seam between pauldron and breastplate, biting deep. It was not fatal, not even gray by Astartes standards, but blood spilled freely, and his movements faltered. Once, the sight would have ignited a spark of anger, or at least the ache of concern for a wounded brother. Now, I merely noted the reduction in combat effectiveness and adjusted my tactical models to compensate. "Are you able to continue, Sergeant?" I asked, my voice a grinding monotone of vox-distorted steel. "I am, Ancient One," Corin replied, sealing the breach in his armor with emergency foam. "It will take more than heretic scum to stop a son of Kor." Sons of Kor. The words lingered, stirring the faintest shadow of memory in the hollow place where Ulrich Wehner had once lived. The phrase stirred something deep within me, an echo of pride or belonging that had somehow endured across centuries of mechanical existence. But it was faint, like the remnants of a dream, and it slipped away even as I tried to seize it. The campaign on Valethra stretched for months. We fought through corrupted cities and desecrated shrines, our boots striking ground that had once been sanctified by the prayers of countless pilgrims over millennia. With every battle and every victory, we drove the heretics back, forcing them toward their final bastion, the planet's primary cathedral spire. Yet as the war dragged on, I began to notice changes in the brothers who fought at my side. The constant exposure to chaos, corruption, the daily sight of blasphemy and defilement weighed heavily upon them. After each engagement, they performed additional rites of purification, lingering for hours in prayer and meditation, desperate to cleanse themselves of whatever taint they feared had seeped into their souls. I carried no such burden. The profane symbols of chaos, which filled my brothers with fury or despair, registered only as target markers, coordinates to be reduced with fire and shell. The blasphemous chants that drove veteran Marines to clamp their hands over their ears were, to me, nothing more than irrelevant noise, data streams to be filtered and discarded. I realized, with a clarity as cold as the steel encasing me, that I was immune to corruption, not through faith nor purity, but because I no longer possessed enough humanity to be tempted. That truth revealed itself most clearly during the final assault on the cathedral spire. We breached the inner sanctum where the cult leaders had gathered for their last stand. The chamber was a grotesque parody of holiness. Sigils writhed across the walls, pulsing in the flickering torchlight as though alive. At its center stood a figure that had once been human. Now it was a warped monstrosity, so hideous that even my mechanical senses recoiled at its presence. The creature, once the planetary governor, spoke in a voice like grinding metal mixed with breaking glass. "Welcome, servants of the false emperor," it hissed. "Come, witness the truth beyond the veil of your precious imperium. See what your devotion has bought you." Sergeant Corin raised his bolter, but his hands shook so violently he could barely maintain his grip. The others fared little better, their faith straining under the weight of the corruption that surrounded them. Only I remained unmoved, my targeting systems calmly locked onto the abomination that mocked them with its very existence. "I see nothing but another target to be eliminated," I said, and opened fire. My assault cannon thundered, shells slamming into its twisted flesh with pitiless precision. It died as all things die when faced with sufficient firepower, its blasphemous form shredded into ruin, its lies silenced forever. The Marines cheered, their faith rekindled by the sight of evil's destruction. But within me, There was no joy, no vindication. There was only the familiar emptiness. The campaign concluded with the planet's purification. Its temples were reconsecrated, its population sifted by the merciless hands of the Inquisition. Those deemed pure were spared. Those touched by corruption were granted the Emperor's peace in fire and blood. It was another victory. Another world wrested from darkness. Another tally in an endless war. As I was loaded back into the transport that would carry me once more to my tomb, Sergeant Corrin approached my sarcophagus. His posture was reverent, almost worshipful, as though he stood before something holy. He removed his helmet, revealing a face uncannily similar to someone I had once known, though the memory refused to settle, flickering at the edges of my mind like a dying flame. "Ancient One," he said, his voice low but steady, "I wanted to thank you for your service during this campaign. Your presence gave us strength when we might have faltered." I looked down at him through the cold clarity of my optical sensors. This young warrior had stood at my side through months of horror and corruption. He was everything a space marine should be: brave, steadfast, and filled with unshakable faith in the righteousness of his cause. In another time, in another life, I might have seen a reflection of myself. But here, I saw only inevitability. He would probably die in some future battle, his name etched onto the rolls of honor that few would ever read. "You fought well, Corvin," I said. "Your chapter is fortunate to have you." He smiled at that, an expression of simple pride that should have warmed whatever remnants of my heart remained. Instead, I found myself calculating how long it would be before that smile was lost forever, before time and war ground him down into yet another entry in the casualty reports. "Will you remember this campaign, Ancient One?" he asked softly. "Will you remember us?" The question struck me with unexpected force. Would I remember? Even now, the details were already beginning to fade, subsumed into the vast tactical database that made up most of my memory. The faces of the Marines, the battles we had fought, the words we had exchanged. Every human thread would soon be reduced to sterile data unless I made a conscious effort to preserve it. "I will remember," I lied, because the truth would have been too cruel to speak aloud. Even as I said it, I knew it was false. I would sleep, and when I woke again, Corvin would be just another name in the archives, another ghost in the endless parade of campaigns that blurred together into violence and death. The organic fragments of my brain capable of holding emotional context were failing year by year, leaving behind only the mechanical residue of memory. Sleep claimed me once again, but this time the dreams were different. Instead of the usual void, I found myself walking through corridors that seemed at once familiar and strange. The walls were lined with battle honors I recognized, yet the names beneath them belonged to Marines I had never heard of. When I tried to read the inscriptions more closely, the words shifted and blurred, as though my very attention made them dissolve. I walked on until I came to a chamber I knew I should recognize, though no specific memory surfaced. In the center stood a figure clad in power armor, his back turned as he studied a tactical display. When he turned to face me, I saw my own face staring back, a face I had not worn for centuries. "Hello, Ulrich," he said, and the voice was the one I remembered before the machines replaced my larynx with Vox Gorils. "Who are you?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "I am who you were," he replied. "I'm the man who died on Morak Prime, the warrior they claimed to have saved. I am everything they cut away when they sealed you in that tomb." I tried to speak, but my voice emerged as the harsh, mechanical rasp I had grown used to, unnatural in this place of memory and dreams. "Why are you here?" I asked. "To remind you," he said simply, "to show you what they took when they gave you this eternal half-life. Look around you, Ulrich. Look at what you have become." I looked, and for the first time in centuries, I saw myself as others must see me. A massive construct of metal and ceramite, a walking weapon that bore only the faintest echo of humanity. My limbs were gun barrels and weapon mounts. My torso was a sarcophagus of armor, designed not for grace or form, but to shield the small fragment of ruined flesh that still carried what remained of my consciousness. I was not a man encased in armor. I was a machine that happened to contain the ghost of a man's memories. They told me I was honored. I said aloud. They told you many things, the figure replied. They said your service would continue, that your wisdom would guide the generations to come, that your sacrifice would never be forgotten. He tilted his head, voice heavy with something I recognized as sorrow. But what did they not tell you? I thought long on that question, sifting through the memories of my interment, replaying the ceremony and the solemn words spoken over my broken body. Finally, I answered. They did not tell me I would forget. They did not tell me that each awakening would strip more of what I was. They did not tell me that I would become a stranger to myself. The figure nodded, as though he had expected my words. They cannot tell you, for they do not understand it themselves. The tech priests see only the preservation of function, the continuation of utility. The chaplains see only the glorification of sacrifice, the promise of transformation into something eternal. None of them comprehend the price that is demanded. What is the price? I asked, though my soul already knew. You, he said simply. Everything that made you Ulrich Wehner. Everything that made you human. Everything that made you more than a weapon with thoughts. You are dying by degrees, fading like ink dissolving in water, until only the machine and its programming remain. I wanted to deny it, to protest that some spark of myself endured despite centuries of mechanical existence. But I cannot. The truth stood clear, the progression undeniable. With each awakening, I felt myself diminish, the machine taking more, leaving less. One day, nothing would remain but the Dreadnought, still bearing my name, but containing nothing of my essence. How long? I asked quietly. Not long now, he replied. Already you struggle to recall faces, to feel connections, to experience anything beyond the cold satisfaction of tactical success. Soon you will be like the others in the deep halls, ancient beyond reckoning, yet empty of everything that once made them who they were. The dream began to unravel. The figure grew translucent, his edges dissolving as consciousness pulled me back to waking. Yet before he vanished completely, his voice lingered one last time. Remember this conversation, Ulrich. For as long as you are able, remember what it felt like to be human. I awoke to the familiar sounds of activation, the hum of charging power cells, the steady hiss of life support systems engaging. Tech priests clustered around my sarcophagus, their movements efficient, their chants directed to the machine spirits they believed dwelt within my form. A chaplain stood nearby, his skull-faced helmet gleaming in the chamber's harsh light. Ancient One, he intoned, his voice heavy with solemn authority. The chapter has need of your wisdom once more. A space hulk has emerged from the warp in the Hadrian system. Its bulk threatens shipping lanes vital to the sector's survival. Boarding actions will be required, and your experience in void warfare is deemed essential. I acknowledged the chaplain's briefing with the ritual responses that had been programmed into me long ago, my voice a grinding echo of formality. Yet even as I complied, part of my mind lingered on the dream I had endured. The figure who claimed to be the man I once was, his warnings about what I was becoming, and the relentless erosion of everything that had ever made me human. Was it simply the result of decaying neural pathways, a glitch in my ancient mind? Or was it something more, some truth I was not meant to face? The space hulk loomed before us, a nightmare of metal adrift in the void. It was a vast conglomeration of shattered vessels, fused together by the warp's cruel touch. A metallic cancer drifting through the stars, its bulk scarred by centuries of violence. Our sensors confirmed life signs scattered throughout its corridors, but whether they belonged to desperate human survivors, alien infestations, or something worse remained unknown. The iron hammers would board in force, cleansing the monstrosity chamber by chamber until it could be safely salvaged or purged by fire. I was assigned to the primary assault team. My immense frame, my armored bulk, and the terrible weight of my weapons made me ideal for the narrow corridors and fortified positions we were certain to encounter. As the boarding torpedo hurtled toward the hulk's corroded hull, I studied the Marines around me with an unusual intensity. Brother Sergeant Matthias sat opposite, his features calm, the composure of 3 centuries of service etched into every line of his face. Beside him was Brother Lucian, scarcely risen from the scout company, his eyes still burning with the fierce promise of youth. The others were no less worthy, paragons of what it meant to bear the gene seed of the Emperor, warriors whose valor deserved remembrance. But I knew I would not remember them. By the time I next awoke, their faces would fade into the haze of my failing organic memory, reduced to sterile entries in combat logs and casualty records. The realization filled me with something I had not felt in decades, an emotion so alien I struggled to name it. At last, I recognized it. Grief. I was grieving for memories not yet lost, for bonds that would never take root, for the man I once was and could never reclaim. The torpedo struck the hulk with a thunderous crash, its melted cutters carving through twisted hull plates and corrupted ceramite. The doors blew open, and we spilled into a corridor that had once belonged to an Imperial cruiser. Now, it was a tomb of steel and shadow, its walls bearing the scars of forgotten battles and the slow, creeping corruption of warp exposure. The air was foul, thick with decay, and something else, something that even my mechanical senses struggled to categorize. It was a wrongness that crawled against every filter, every sensor, every remnant of instinct still buried in my brain. Contacts ahead, Matthias reported. His auspex painted ghostly figures in the darkness. Multiple life signs, but the readings are strange. I magnified my optics, scanning the gloom. My targeting systems automatically cataloged each form, calculating vectors of fire and probability of kill. And then I understood why the readings had faltered. The corridor crawled with creatures that had once been human. Warp corruption had twisted them into nightmares. Some bore writhing limbs sprouting from their torsos. Others had faces stretched into grotesque masks, caught forever between agony and ecstasy. Their movements were shambling, uncertain, as though the remnants of their humanity still struggled futilely against the dominion of the warp. Warp touched, I announced, my vox booming through the stagnant air. Cleanse them with fire and steel. Grant them the Emperor's peace. The Marines responded with flawless discipline, their bolters roaring in perfect unison. They advanced as one, a wall of faith and fury. And I followed behind, an iron sentinel, bringing the Emperor's judgment to the broken husks that dared still cling to life. My assault cannon added its thunder to the symphony of destruction. The warp-touched fell before us like wheat beneath a scythe, their corrupted forms unable to withstand the Emperor's fury. Yet as the slaughter unfolded, my sensors lingered on the faces of the fallen. They had once been Imperial citizens, men and women who had prayed for salvation as their vessel was dragged through the warp. Transformed against their will, made into monsters by forces beyond comprehension. In another life, I might have felt pity or rage for their fate. Now I felt only the cold satisfaction of targets removed and threats neutralized. Mercy had become efficiency, death calculated as preferable to corruption. We pushed through the hulk in methodical waves, clearing chamber after chamber. The fused vessels yielded horrors. Some rooms held creatures of living shadow and crystalline shrieks, attacking with weapons born of nightmare. Other compartments sheltered human survivors who, despite centuries of warp exposure, retained fraying sanity, begging for rescue or release from endless torment. One engagement remains stark in my memory. Brother Lucian, young and eager, confronted a thing of liquid metal and malevolent intent. Its touch corrupted his armor. Blessed ceramite blackened and sprouted spines. He screamed as the taint climbed his arm, his flesh bubbling, reforming beneath the will of chaos. I acted without hesitation. My power fist closed on the creature, crushing it, and my flame projectors cleansed the deck in purifying fire. Still, corruption had already lodged in his tissues. Even as I burned the last of the thing from his plating, I could see the change spreading through his skin. Ancient One, he whispered, voice broken by pain, I can feel it changing me. I hear voices whispering blasphemies. End this before I become something that shames my chapter. The plea struck me. A young warrior, steps barely begun, asking for a swift, merciful release rather than a slow undoing. In another life, I would have felt the sorrow and the duty in that choice. Now, the calculus was clinical. Lucian was compromised, a vector that could spread corruption and doom the mission. The mathematics of survival offered no humane alternative. I raised my power fist. Its field crackled with contained force. Go to the Emperor's side, brother. Your watch is ended. The blow was decisive, bone and brain crushed beneath the gauntlet before prolonged agony could register. Brother Lucian died as a warrior. The apothecaries recovered his gene seed, preserving what could be saved. Blood pooled across corrupted deck plates. The Marines chanted prayers and set wards to slow further taint. They grieved with voices old as faith. I cataloged their mourning, effects on morale, changes to formation cohesion, and adjusted tactical models accordingly. Their sorrow registered in my systems as data. It did not touch the hollow where a name had once lived. When the corridor fell silent, I stood among wreckage and considered my action. My logs stamped the event with coordinates and time, filed it in the chapter archive. There was no internal echo, no tremor of conscience, only the mechanical acceptance of necessity. It was not that I had been corrupted. I had been hollowed by preservation. The space once occupied by anger, pity, and small mercies had calcified into the rigid calculus of a weapon. What remained of Ulrich Wehner had been diminished, degree by degree. Each act of necessary violence felt like an incision. With every life taken and every memory that slipped, I was filed further into function, the man eroding beneath layers of iron and ritual, inching toward the eternity the chapter prized. I moved on, cannon ready. The Hulk offered up new targets for the Emperor's judgment. No sorrow, no anger, no sense of loss at a promising life ended before its time. I had become precisely what they had built me to be, a weapon that could think but could no longer feel. The mission stretched on for weeks, our forces methodically clearing the Hulk section by section while the Tech Marines worked to determine whether any part of it could be salvaged for the Imperium. We encountered foes ranging from feral humans, driven mad by endless exposure to the warp, to creatures that seemed to exist only partially within normal reality, beings of pure malice given temporary form by the chaotic energies saturating the Hulk. Through it all, I performed my function with mechanical precision. Threats were identified, optimal responses calculated, targets eliminated with the cold efficiency that centuries of warfare had etched into my systems. And yet, even as I fought, I found myself observing my battle brothers with a growing sense of detachment, studying their human reactions to the horrors we faced as though I were a scholar examining rare specimens. When Sergeant Matthias wept for the civilians we found transformed into living furniture for some demon's pleasure, I cataloged his emotional response as a potential tactical weakness. When Brother Chaplain Erasmus raged at the blasphemies carved into the Hulk's walls, I noted the inefficiency of his anger-driven actions compared to the cold logic I had come to embody. I was becoming something that could analyze humanity, but no longer participate in it. A consciousness that remembered what emotions it felt like, but could no longer experience them directly. The dream I had endured before deployment no longer seemed like a malfunction, but a warning. A final message from whatever fragment of the man I had once been still clung to life within my sarcophagus. The campaign ended when we reached the Hulk's core, a vast chamber that had once been the bridge of an ancient battleship. At its center sat a figure that might have been human long ago, but the warp had twisted it into something existing as much in concept as in flesh. Its voice came from everywhere and nowhere, speaking to us in a chorus of tones, offering knowledge and power in exchange for our souls. My battle brothers recoiled, their faith shielding them from the worst of its influence. But I felt nothing, no temptation, no revulsion. The creature's promises meant nothing to me, because I no longer possess the capacity to desire anything beyond the completion of my assigned objectives. When I opened fire, my assault cannon roared a sustained burst into its shifting form. As it dissolved, the creature screamed, and in its death cry I thought I heard laughter. "You are already ours," it whispered, even as its body unraveled into nothing. "You are already empty, already lost. We need do nothing but wait." The hulk was eventually cleared and divided for salvage. Useful components were stripped away, while corrupted sections were burned clean with purifying fire. The Iron Hammers had acquitted themselves with honor once again, their battle standards weighted with fresh laurels, and their casualty rolls mercifully light considering the nature of our foe. But as I was loaded back into my transport sarcophagus for the journey home, I found myself thinking about the demon's final words. Was I already lost? Already empty? Had the slow erosion of my humanity progressed so far that nothing remained to save? I tried to recall the faces of the Marines who had fought beside me during the campaign. Matthias, Lucian, Erasmus. Already they were fading, reduced to statistical entries in my combat database. Their courage, their faith, their individual identities, all the things that had made them who they were, lost to the mechanical efficiency of my transformed consciousness. Sleep claimed me once again, but this time the darkness felt different. I did not fall into the familiar void. Instead, I found myself standing within a vast chamber lined with sarcophagi. Each stone and iron shell bore the name and heraldry of a dreadnought, titles carved in the old tongue. As I drew near, faint voices leaked from the armored husks, whispers that trembled with memory. "Remember us," they pleaded. "Remember who we were before they made us this. Remember that we were human once." I moved from case to case, reading names that now meant nothing to me, but had once belonged to warriors of terrible renown. Brother Ancient Thaddeus, who had held Kor's gates against an entire orc war band. Brother Ancient Casimir, whose tactical genius had saved 3 sectors from chaos. Brother Ancient Mordian, who had walked beside Primarchs and been counted among legends. Each had been reduced to a consciousness trapped in iron. Their humanity leached away until all that remained were weapons that still remembered what it had felt like to be alive. "This is what awaits you," said a voice I knew. I turned to see the figure from my dream, the man who claimed to be what I had once been. He looked older here, more faded, as if he, too, was being consumed. "How long have I?" I asked. "Not long," he answered. "Each awakening takes you further from what you were. Each battle makes you more machine and less man. Soon you will be like them, a name on a sarcophagus and nothing more. Is there no way to stop it?" I asked, my voice hollow in that vaulted place. He studied me with eyes that held an exhaustion older than memory. "There is one way," he said, "but it requires you to feel. It requires you to remember what it means to be human, to choose pain over apathy, to choose memory over the convenient erasure of function. It asks you to care. Choose what?" I demanded. "Choose to feel," he replied simply. "Choose to remember, even if the recollections wound you. Choose to be human, even if humanity is what they tore from you." As the dream dissolved, his last words trailed with me into waking. "The choice is yours, Ulrich. Choose quickly, before there is nothing left to choose with." My waking was abrupt. Alarms screamed. The activation sequence was rushed. Tech Marines moved with practiced violence, bringing systems online while chaplains intoned clipped prayers over my armor and weapons. Something was terribly wrong. I was needed at once. "Ancient One," Chapter Master Corvin said when the briefing began, his voice taut with urgency. "Our home world is under attack. A massive chaos fleet has emerged from the warp, led by the traitor warband called the Iron Skulls. They mean to seize our sacred relics and pervert our gene seed for corrupt ends." I probed the memory banks for dossiers on the Iron Skulls and found only fragments, intelligence reports, half-scorched tactical assessments. Once they had been loyal Marines, servants of the Emperor, before corruption bent them. Their leader bore a name the files dared not speak lightly. The Ravager, a former chapter master whose tactical brilliance had been perverted into an instrument of chaos. "What is my deployment?" I asked. The main courtyard of the fortress monastery, Corvin replied. Our defense depends on holding the central approach. Your firepower will be essential to breaking their advance. The old programming aligned with the dark awareness the dream had planted. Orders settled across my logic like a cold tide, and beneath them the whispered choice lingered. Remember or be forgotten. I tightened my grips and prepared to answer the summons, wondering which choice I would make before the coming storm. The chapter survival may depend on your service, Ancient One. As I was carried to my deployment position, I looked upon the fortress monastery with eyes that felt strangely new. This was my home. Here, I had been reborn as a warrior of the Emperor. Its walls had sheltered generations of iron hammers. Its halls had echoed with the prayers and hymns of countless brothers who had gone to war and never returned. For the first time in centuries, something stirred deep within me, an emotion I had thought long extinguished. Perhaps it was attachment. Perhaps it was love. Whatever it was, it carried weight. This place mattered. The Marines who defended it mattered. The legacy etched into every stone of the fortress mattered. The enemy descended with the fury of the damned. Chaos Marines clad in black and crimson surged through the smoking ruins of the outer defenses, their war cries blasphemous, their weapons spitting death. At their head strode a giant in Terminator armor, a presence so malignant that even the air seemed to recoil. His gaze fell upon me, heavy and poisonous. The Ravager. Even through the filters of my mechanical senses, I could feel the crushing weight of his attention. When he spoke, his voice carried the terrible authority of a man who had once commanded the loyalty of hundreds of Space Marines. So, he said, his words booming through corrupted Vox amplifiers, laced with warp-spawned power. The famous ancient Ulrich awakens at last to defend his corpse-worshipping brothers. Tell me, Machine Ghost, do you even remember what it felt like to be alive? The taunt struck with unexpected force, not because it wounded me, but because it echoed my dream, the choice that had been placed before me. I could meet him with cold, mechanical efficiency, treating this battle as just another tactical problem. Or I could embrace the memory of what it meant to fight for something greater than mere programming. I remember enough, I replied. And for the first time in centuries, I meant it. The battle that followed was unlike any I had fought since my entombment. For so long, I had been guided by calculation alone. But now I felt something else, something deeper, almost forgotten. Passion. These were my brothers dying around me. This was my home, my chapter, my legacy. The fortress stood as the embodiment of everything I had sworn to protect. I surged forward, my assault cannon roaring, its thunderous song tearing into the corrupted ranks. Enemy fire struck my armor in blazing arcs, but I pressed on, each step carrying me closer to the heart of their formation. For the first time in centuries, I was not merely obeying my programming. I was choosing to fight. The Ravager met me among the shattered ruins of a shrine dedicated to our honored dead. His power was immense. Corruption radiated from him in waves, a visible tide that warped the air and withered stone beneath our feet. His strikes came with the fury of a demigod, his armor soaked in the blessings of foul powers. But as our weapons clashed, I felt something I had not known for lifetimes. I felt alive. Not the mechanical imitation of existence I had endured, but something close to the raw vitality I had once known as a flesh and blood warrior. Each blow, each desperate contest of strength, brought back echoes of humanity. You cannot win, corpse machine, the Ravager snarled as our weapons locked in a deadly bind. You are already dead, already empty. You fight for nothing but the memory of what you once were. Perhaps, I answered. And in the depths of my consciousness, I felt something that might have been a smile. But that memory is enough. I broke his guard with a move I had not used in centuries, a technique born of intuition rather than calculation, feeling rather than programming. My power fist found a narrow gap in his armor and crushed the corrupted flesh beneath, ending his existence with the same mercy I had once granted to Brother Lucian so long ago. As the Ravager fell, his followers faltered, their fanatical devotion cracking under the weight of his death. The Iron Hammers seized the moment, pressing their advantage with bolt and blade, driving the remaining Chaos Marines back toward their landing craft. The battle was won. The fortress monastery stood. The chapter's legacy had been preserved for another generation. But as I stood among the bodies of friend and foe alike, I felt a shift within me. The mechanical detachment that had defined my existence was still present, but it was no longer absolute. Alongside it, growing stronger with every heartbeat of my failing flesh, was something that remembered what it meant to care. I looked at the Marines who had fought beside me, these young warriors who bore the gene seed of heroes and carried the weight of an ancient legacy. For the first time in centuries, I saw their faces not as data points to be cataloged and forgotten, but as individuals worthy of remembrance and honor. Brother Captain Thane, who had held the Eastern Wall with a courage that would have made the chapter's founders proud. Sergeant Maxim, whose tactical brilliance had turned the tide when defeat seemed inevitable. Chaplain Morai, whose prayers had sustained the defenders' faith through the darkest hours. I committed their names to the fragile, organic parts of my memory, storing them alongside emotions that machines could not process. They would not be mere entries in a combat report, but brothers whose deeds had earned a place in the halls of honor. In remembering them, I remembered what it meant to be more than a weapon that could think. The years that followed brought new challenges, new wars, new enemies. Yet something fundamental had changed in the way I approached each conflict. The mechanical efficiency remained, as did the tactical acumen that had made me valuable to the chapter's leadership. But now it stood beside something else, something that chose to fight rather than merely executing programming. I began to take an active interest in the Marines who serve alongside me, learning their names, holding their faces in my mind between deployments. I offered counsel to young officers who sought guidance from the chapter's honored ancients, sharing not just tactical knowledge, but something approaching wisdom. When battle brothers fell in combat, I felt their loss as more than a reduction in combat effectiveness. Even the other dreadnoughts noticed the change, though few understood it. Brother Ancient Theron, who had once counseled me to forget mortal concerns, approached me during one of our rare waking intervals. "You have changed, young brother," he said, his ancient voice tinged with confusion. "You seem different than before." "I have remembered something I thought was lost," I replied. "I have remembered what it means to be human." "Humanity is a weakness," Theron said, repeating the words he had spoken so many times over the centuries. "It binds us to concerns that no longer matter, to feelings that serve no purpose. We're beyond such things now. Are we?" I asked. "Or have we simply forgotten why we fought in the first place?" Theron had no answer for that, and our conversation dissolved into the familiar silence that had defined our existence for so long. Yet even in that silence, I sensed my words settling into him like seeds falling upon barren soil. Perhaps they would never grow. Perhaps they would. During my next awakening, I learned that Brother Ancient Solomon, the eldest of our number, had at last been granted the peace he had sought for so long. His death had been quiet, his life support systems simply ceasing to maintain the spark of consciousness that had endured for over a millennium. The Tech Marines declared it a malfunction, a failure of ancient systems. But I knew better. Solomon had chosen to let go, to release his grip on an existence that had brought him only suffering. He had found his own way to escape the prison of flesh and iron that had held him for centuries. I envied him that choice, even as I mourned his passing. But I also understood, in that moment, that I was not yet ready to make the same decision. There was still too much to remember, too much to experience, too many brothers to guide and protect. The humanity I had reclaimed was fragile, constantly threatened by the cold pull of my mechanical existence. But it was mine. I would hold it as long as I could. Centuries passed. I watched the chapter evolve around me like a living organism. New traditions rose as old ones faded. The faces of my battle brothers changed with each awakening, generations living and dying as I remained. Yet the essential spirit of the Iron Hammers endured. Each time I awoke, I made the conscious choice to care about what I found, to invest meaning in the bonds of brotherhood connecting me to these warriors. It was not easy. The mechanical aspects of my existence tugged constantly at me, urging me back toward the cold efficiency that had once defined my every action. The organic fragments of my mind continued to erode, stealing away memories and emotions that could never be restored. But I fought against that decay with every awakening, choosing humanity over mechanical perfection, feeling over efficiency. During the campaign against the Tyranid Splinter Fleet designated Kraken Spawn, I saved the life of a young assault marine named Corvin. He reminded me of someone I had known long ago, though the memory remained elusive, like a word on the edge of recall. When he thanked me for preserving his life, I felt something that might have been paternal pride. Serve the chapter well, I told him, and for the first time in centuries, the words carried genuine meaning. I will, Ancient One, he replied. I will make you proud. Proud. The concept should have been alien to a being who existed primarily as a weapon system, but I understood it perfectly. I was proud of this young Marine, proud of his courage, his dedication, proud to serve beside him in the Emperor's name. When the campaign ended and I was returned to my tomb in the deep halls, I carried that pride with me into the darkness of sleep. It was a small thing, perhaps insignificant against the vast scope of the galaxy's endless wars, but it was mine. It was human. It was real. I awoke for what would become my final battle on a world whose name I never learned, facing an enemy I could not identify. The details have faded like morning mist, leaving only impressions. Smoke and thunder, brothers falling, enemies advancing, desperate last stands, and hard-won victories. What I remember most clearly is the moment my systems began to fail. Not the mechanical components, which had been maintained with almost religious devotion by generations of tech marines, but the organic fragments that still contained whatever was left of my consciousness. I could feel them shutting down one by one, like lights going dark across a city under siege, each flicker of memory and emotion extinguished in turn as the end finally drew near. The realization struck with perfect clarity. I was dying. Not the false death of mechanical failure that could be repaired by skilled artificers, but the true death, the one that came when consciousness itself began to fade. After centuries of half-life, I was finally approaching the end that had been denied to me for so long. I could have resisted. The medical systems within my sarcophagus were capable of sustaining my failing organs for years, perhaps even decades more. But as my awareness dimmed, I understood that I no longer wished to prolong this existence. The fragile humanity I had fought to reclaim was bound to biological systems that, once lost, could never be restored. Without them, I would become exactly what Theron had warned of, a weapon that could think but no longer feel. So I chose to let go. My final act was to record a message within my sarcophagus's databanks, a testament to be discovered by whatever tech marine eventually examined my remains. In it, I try to explain what I had learned during my centuries of entombment, the necessity of remembering what it meant to be human, even when humanity seemed lost forever. To those who come after, I said, my mechanical voice weakening with each word, remember that we are more than weapons in the Emperor's arsenal. We are the sons of men who chose to serve something greater than themselves. Do not let the machine consume what makes you who you are. Choose to feel, even when feeling brings pain. Choose to remember, even when memory is all that remains. Choose to be human, whatever form that humanity may take. The message concluded just as my consciousness began its final ebb. As darkness gathered, I felt something I had not known since my days as a flesh and blood warrior. I felt peace. The last sensation I retained was the sound of battle continuing around my motionless form, my battle brothers fighting on without the support of their ancient. They would mourn my passing, I knew, and my name would be added to the rolls of honor alongside all the other heroes who had given their lives in service to the chapter. But more than that, I hoped that someone would find my message and understand what I had tried to teach them, the true price of our supposed immortality. As consciousness faded completely, I found myself once again in the chamber of dreams where I had encountered the echo of my former self. But this time I was not alone. The other dreadnoughts were there as well, not as the hollow shells they had been in life, but as the men they had been before entombment. Brother Ancient Gareth stood beside me, his face no longer hidden by the skull mask of chaplain, but revealed as that of a man who had once laughed with his brothers and wept for the fallen. "Welcome, Ulrich," he said, and his voice was warm, filled with the humanity absent from his mechanical speech for centuries. "Your watch is ended." Around us, the other ancients nodded in acknowledgement, their faces radiant with the peace that had been denied to them for so long. Solomon was there, looking younger than I had ever seen him, the weight of millennia finally lifted from his shoulders. Theron stood nearby, his rigid dogma replaced by the quiet satisfaction of a duty at last completed. "I remember now," I said, and the words came easily, without the mechanical rasp that had defined my speech for so long. "As do we all," Gareth replied. "The machine could preserve our consciousness, but it could not preserve our souls. Those we had to save for ourselves. Through choice, through will, and through the stubborn refusal to surrender what had once made us human, we endured." I looked around at these warriors who had served so long and suffered so deeply, and I understood that their sacrifice had not been meaningless. They had carried centuries of half-life, not because they had been ordered to, but because they had chosen to. They had remained at their posts not out of mechanical compulsion, but out of love for their brothers and loyalty to ideals that transcended both flesh and steel. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we rest," Solomon answered, his voice filled with the contentment of a man who had finally set down a burden too heavy to bear. "Our vigil is ended. Our duty is complete. We have earned our peace." The chamber began to dissolve around us, yet I felt no fear as it faded. For the first time since my entombment, I was truly free. Free from the mechanical bonds that had chained my consciousness. Free from the endless cycle of awakening and sleep. Free from the slow erosion of everything that had once made me who I was. As the darkness claimed me for the final time, I heard voices lifted in song. My battle brothers were singing the ancient hymns of victory, their chants echoing across the battlefield as they drove back the enemy. They would continue the fight without me, just as they had before my awakenings, and as they would long after my passing. The war would endure, as it always had, but they would face it as men, not as machines. And in that knowledge, I found my peace at last. The sarcophagus of Brother Ancient Ulrich the Eternal was recovered from the battlefield 3 days later. Its systems were silent for the first time in centuries, though its armor was unscarred, its weapons still fully charged, its life support mechanisms still intact. The Techmarines who examined it found no fault, no damage, nothing to explain the cessation of function. It was Techmarine Corin who uncovered the hidden message embedded within the databanks. A final testament from a warrior whose service had spanned nearly 6 centuries. He read it in silence, his enhanced eyes moving across words that spoke of humanity preserved against impossible odds, of consciousness maintained through sheer will, of the terrible cost borne by those denied the peace of death. When at last he finished, Corin was quiet for a long time. He had known ancient Ulrich only as a legend, a towering engine of war, a weapon whose presence on the battlefield had inspired generations of iron hammers. But the message revealed something else entirely. The voice of a man who had remained human despite everything done to preserve his service. Corin copied the testament to his personal data slate, sealing it with encryption keys known only to the chapter's highest leadership. He understood the danger of such knowledge. It challenged the very foundation of the Dreadnought program, the belief that entombment was an honor rather than a curse. Yet he also knew that within those words lay wisdom future generations might one day need, a warning about the price of the immortality they bestowed upon their greatest heroes. In the deep halls of the fortress monastery, the other dreadnoughts noticed the silence where Ulrich's sarcophagus had once hummed with mechanical life. Brother Ancient Theron, who had counseled so many to abandon their human concerns, found himself remembering conversations held over the course of centuries. The questions Ulrich had asked, the doubts he had voiced, the relentless insistence that humanity was worth preserving, even against the lure of mechanical perfection. For the first time in longer than he could measure, Theron began to wonder if his ancient colleague had been right. The funeral rites for ancient Ulrich were carried out with the full measure of ceremony due to a hero of his stature. His name was etched into the rolls of honor, his deeds carved into the chapter's memory. Yet for those who had heard his final message, his legacy was more than stone or song. It was a reminder that even within iron and fire, the spark of humanity could endure. Chapter Master Corvin delivered the eulogy, speaking of duty fulfilled and sacrifice honored, of a warrior who had served faithfully for nearly 6 centuries. The assembled Marines listened in reverent silence, their voices later rising in hymns of praise and remembrance. Yet in the deep halls where the other dreadnoughts waited between battles, the silence that replaced Ulrich's presence spoke of something different. It spoke of rest finally earned, of peace long denied, but at last granted, of a vigil that had lasted long enough. For those with the wisdom to hear it, that silence carried more truth than all the words of praise echoing through the fortress monastery's vaulted chambers. The Iron Hammers continued their service to the Emperor as they always had. New recruits took the places of the fallen. New campaigns tested courage and faith. New enemies rose from the darkness between the stars. The great wheel of war turned forward with inexorable purpose, grinding men and worlds alike beneath its weight. But in the chapter's archives, sealed away from all but the most trusted hands, a message waited. It spoke quietly across the centuries, a testament to those willing to listen. It told of the horror hidden within their greatest honors, of the price paid by warriors denied the peace of death, of the choice every consciousness must face between the cold perfection of the machine and the flawed, fragile beauty of human feeling. And somewhere in the endless void, in whatever realm awaited those who had laid down their burdens, the spirit of a man named Ulrich Veinar rested at last. His watch was ended. His duty was complete. His humanity, against all odds, had been preserved. In the end, that was enough. The war would go on, as it always had and always would. Heroes would rise and fall. Victories would be claimed and lost. The eternal struggle would continue across a million worlds beneath alien stars. Yet in one small corner of that vast, unending conflict, a single soul had made the choice to remain human despite everything that had been done to strip that humanity away. In making that choice, in preserving what made him who he was despite centuries of mechanical existence, Ulrich Veinar achieved something no weapon could accomplish and no machine could replicate. He remained true to himself until the very end, proving that the human spirit could endure even the most terrible of transformations. The sarcophagus that had been his prison for so long now stood empty in the chapter's halls of remembrance. Its weapons were silent, its systems cold and dark, yet the message it carried lived on, a testament to the power of choice, to the endurance of dignity in the face of impossible odds. For those with eyes to see and ears to hear, it served both as warning and as inspiration. A reminder that we are more than the sum of our mechanical parts, more than the weapons we wield, more than the endless wars we fight. We're the choices we make, the feelings we preserve, the humanity we refuse to surrender, no matter how dark the path before us becomes. And in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war and the mocking laughter of thirsting gods, that message offered something rarer than victory and more precious than glory. It offered hope.